Pessoal, boa tarde. Hoje eu estou aqui com o Eirik Westcoat, que é autor de diversos livros relacionados a runas, magia das runas, também umas coisas relacionadas também à mitologia nórdica. Ele também tem vários estudos também relacionados a presença de runas e sagas, então a gente vai ver várias coisas diversificadas, né, através também das experiências dele, com a questão também relacionada ao neopaganismo. Uma das coisas também que é preciso deixar também claro aqui na entrevista é que o nosso convidado, ele apresenta transtorno do processo auditivo central, que é TPAC, então é uma dificuldade que tem alteração de compreensão, memorização e localização de sons. Então, para essa entrevista, eu elaborei perguntas já colocadas, eu enviei para ele todas as perguntas que vão ser feitas aqui. Então, eu vou lendo as perguntas e ele vai vendo quais são também as perguntas que eu estou lendo, também para facilitar a compreensão dele devido a essa dificuldade. Então, eu vou começar aqui e a gente vai começar as perguntas. Mr. Westcoat, thank you so much for accepting the invitation. It's a pleasure having you here in the channel. For start the interview, I'd like to start with the first question. How did your interest in studying topics related to the Viking Age and Norse mythology begin?
Okay, this one goes back quite a long time. I could say, I guess it started when I discovered the existence of, like, say, neo-paganism and similar movements. I guess when I was a senior in college the first time, and I guess and a lot of that, I guess that was general Wicca at the time, but a lot of it, I guess, a lot of it would lose my interest, but the one part of it that I noticed and that kept my interest was the runes. Like I said, some of those materials would use runes for divination purposes, and that really caught my attention. And that stuck with me and led me more toward the interests in things Viking and Norse mythology afterwards. And it just kept snowballing into there and toward around, and then back around 2006-ish, it started to go into an interest in perhaps maybe kind of graduate school studies on that eventually, which I eventually got around to starting in 2014.
Well, that's interesting. So your interest starts in some aspects of the runes, of neo-paganism. Oh, that's very interesting. In your opinion, how can we define the meaning of runes and their function? Do you have similarities between their uses today and the use of the Viking Age?
Okay, okay, that can be a little bit of a complicated question here. I mean, certainly in the modern age, runes are popular for divination, although and it is a controversial question as to whether they were ever used for divination. There's only some circumstantial evidence and maybe some tantalizing language clues, but like a set of divinatory lots like people use today, nothing like that has ever been found in any of the historical records. So you'll have one camp claiming that such things never existed. Although we do have, regarding divination with lots, we do have the statement from Tacitus. I think he's writing about the end of the 1st century, in which he does discuss cutting up a piece of a branch and marking it with signs. Of course, there's an endless debate over whether or not the signs he's referring to are runes. I think on account of recent finds like the, I believe it's the Svingerud stone, there was, I believe they dated that toward the very beginning of the Common Era. So it's the point where I think that there's a good chance that there was a potential that the runes could have been used on those lot slips that Tacitus is describing. Whether we'll ever get confirmation of that, who knows? But at least as far as the overlapping timings, I think it seems clear that the runes almost certainly did exist as a writing form at the time Tacitus was writing that passage. But then I think, in any case, Let's see. But as far as other uses, well, I guess there's some, of course, the uses with we do see what appear to be magically minded inscriptions in a lot of the older stuff, and that gets used today. But of course, we see a lot of very mundane inscriptions, especially starting in the Viking Age. And as far as writing goes, we can get into there's more to get into this into a later question, but certainly I would say the way people write with runes today is, for the most part, not really like the way they were used to write in the beginning. A lot of writing today tries to treat the runes as like a substitute for alphabet letters, and that's not how any of the older cultures wrote with the runes. Well, no, not exactly. Actually, when you get to the late medieval period, they start making runic alphabets. But before that, like Viking Age and earlier, they were not written with the way we use alphabet letters today.
That's very intriguing, because we can saw that runes pass with main changes to the past, to the present, but we can see that have a lot of things that we can say how runes are using for magic or using as an alphabet only, and it's a very how can I say, a very mystery in some points with the uses of the runes in many aspects, I think. For the third questions is, what do you have related to the content regarding the runes in the sagas?
Okay, let's see. I know there's a lot there. I'm only familiar with it. I can only recall a little bit of it at the moment. Probably the most famous one is the various descriptions in Egil's saga. And at one point where he's perhaps carving runes to on a poisoned drinking horn, I guess there's certainly quite a dramatic scene there. And then another scene where he runs across the let's see, it's some farmhouse, and I guess the woman there is like sick in bed, and this other farm boy had carved runes that caused her sickness, and so Egil comes in to correct the runes to cure the woman. So I guess we have stories like that in these runes, or in the sagas here. I know I believe in Grettir's saga, there's another scene in which I believe let's see, I think it's Grettir's saga, which carves some runes on a tree trunk to attack Grettir, unless I'm getting that confused with a different saga. I know there's a fair bit elsewhere, but it gets into some scattered mentions. You get some scattered mentions, I think, in the legendary sagas, but some of which are maybe even perhaps more to what degree any of these descriptions were ever connected to actual practices is still debated. Let's see, and that would be another rabbit hole to go down to. It, like, to what level of rune using culture was there in Iceland itself at the time of the sagas were written down, which was about Snorri's time. Like Egil's saga, for instance, seems pretty clear that was written down in the 1200s. And at what point, are these traditions that have been handed down for a couple hundred years regarding Egil's uses of the runes, or are they and how does that relate to whatever kind of current rune using there may have been at that time in Iceland, which I'm not sure that there was that much. So it's a bit of a complicated web in there with regards to them, because it's clear that I guess it's certainly at the times these sagas are being written down, it's a very different rune using culture than, say, there was in maybe the beginning of the Viking Age or even earlier in the Elder Futhark period. But it seems, and then of course we see with regards to they were a lot used, especially certainly amount of usage of them for like mundane writing. In this case, I'm thinking of the finds in Bergen. I forget what century they're dated to, but whole bunches of rune sticks for all sorts of random uses you can think of. some most mundane, a few magical. There's some, I believe, I think there's a poetic charm in Galdrolog or something similar to Galdrolog in one of those bargain sticks. So there's a lot of content to explore there. I guess it would be nice to have a good, I guess, book that summarizes all of this, especially for my interests. Would be like summarizing all of the references to the magical stuff in runes with that period, but I'm not sure what that would be.
That's interesting. So we can solve many points of the use of the runes as magics in some points that use it in the sagas, but it's possible we can see that in some rune stones are inspired many contents of the sagas in this aspect of the uses of magic in runes.
Okay, that's a good point you mentioned about rune stones. As far as I know, we don't have any memorial rune stones in, for instance, really in the sagas or in Iceland the way that we do in Sweden. Sweden and Norway, but I think it was really Sweden that's really the where the most memorial rune stones were carved.
Oh, that's interesting. I saw on your website the Scalded Eagle, something related to the American foothack. And could you explain what it is this new way of using runes is about?
Okay. Yes, so this is too, I guess this touches back on a little bit what I said a bit earlier about how we write rune. Most people write runes differently. They use them today a little bit differently than what they were originally. So the American Futhark here, this is my reform of the Anglo-Saxon Futhark rune rose in order to, I guess, many purposes, but I guess this, in terms of writing, a reform designed so that it would not be possible to write using runes again in exactly the same way that runes were originally used to write language, even back in the Elder Futhark period. And what the two have in common is that, I guess, in the Elder Futhark period for the first rune masters, that was the Elder Futhark of 24 runes, which were paired fairly exactly to the sounds of the language at the time, which seems to be, depending on whom you ask, they'll say it's like either something like Proto-Germanic or Proto-Norse, and it has simple elegance to it. I guess the rune carvers, they would learn the system, I guess, like mouth to ear, because they didn't have dictionaries and they didn't have books there. And I guess maybe they started out having maybe one can imagine like large bundles of sticks with runes on them, but that's pretty laborious to carve. But they would learn mouth to ear with it's 24 names, the 24 names of these sounds, and names of the runes as the key to the sounds. And then writing words would be a matter of like training their ears and their brain so that they could pick apart the word into each of its component sounds. And then for every sound in the word, match one of the 24 runes that fits it closest. And so that's how that kind of rune writing worked. And that's what the American Futhark does in its reform today. Our language is a bit different for American English. It's a bit different, but in this case, there's 33 runes to go with 33 sounds that you can then use them to write American English in the same way. In other words, picking apart an individual word to its individual sounds, and then matching each sound to the to exactly one out of the 33 runes it fits best to.
Oh,
and in order to do that without any reference to, say, like alphabet spelling. Because I think a lot of modern rune, the way a lot of modern people write with runes is what they secretly or not so secretly desire is just a simple alphabet substitution. So, like, in other words, take each of the 26 English letters of the English alphabet and replace it with a rune. And this is, in my view, this doesn't get this. This is just only it's a simple trick and not a very useful one, in my opinion. But I found it far more interesting and certainly useful for, say, again, to going into the further, like, perhaps magical or divinatory applications, have a rune system that works in the same way as the original Eller Futhark, with that process of identifying the sounds of the word and matching them to the runes. So, of course, the main difference, of course, the difference is, with American English, you need 33 runes minimum to do this. So 24 is insufficient. So that's, of course, it's the linguistics that drive this. So without going further into the linguistic details, there are arguments that 33 is the minimum number you need for this. And I found the arguments to be pretty solid. So the American Futhark just 33 runes.
That's very interesting, because it's a new form of to see the runes and using some inspirations for create this new type of alphabet to using with the American English. It's a very, very fantastic. See, this is very, very, very different.
And another thing, it continues, the American Futhark, it also gives names to all of these sounds, so that, again, so that each rune name reflects the sound that the rune represents. And like the original Eller Futhark, in most cases, it's the sound that the word starts with.
It's very, very different. So that things, it's we can say that runes can open many possibilities to create new things, for understand, to put in, how can I say, language that are many more young if compared to the Futhark's alphabet. The first question is, in your book, Viking Poetry for Health Needs, what kind of content can we find regarding the using of poetry and the roots of the health and the religion? And the audiobook version is a complement to use with the process of the rituals.
Oh, I guess I was trying to say, I did want to add one more thing about the American Futhark, before going on to that question. Is another thing that especially inspired me on this, on the creation of it, is the poetic angle. Namely, that I consider not only are the runes the keys to the sound for the language, but they're also the keys to the alliteration. In other words, that the runes themselves are a guide to the poetry, and that you have so many consonants and whatever, and they represent all the different possibilities for alliteration. And so this is, I think it would go into, it may go into a bit of a tangent and some detail, but I think that was actually one of the more important design points for me, and that this, the American Futhark is strongly linked to the poetry for that.
Yeah, it's I think it's a very different way to comprehend this part of the runes, because it's for me it's a thing that for me it's a very thing new to understand about the American Futhark. I never see a lot of this using type of the runes, and I was very interested when I read in your site. I think that's a very curious thing to analyze. It's very, very different and very, very nice to solve that use of the runes. For the first question that I ask you is about your book, Viking Poetry and the Health Needs. The contents that we can find regarding the use of poetry and the roots of the Reaton religion. In the audiobook version, it's a complement to use with the process of the rituals.
Okay. On that, I think the first thing that can be said about Viking poetry for heathen rites is, I can think of it as I would think of it as kind of an Alsa-True book, but it's not an Alsa-True 101 book, which is to say, the book assumes the reader is at least somewhat familiar with the idea of how, I guess, modern heathen religious practices work, at least in like the rough, broad outlines. And there's a lot of poetry that's, I guess, written assuming there's a basic familiarity with how certain aspects of the religious rituals work. Namely, for instance, there's in modern heathen religion holding a 3-round symbols, which are, I guess, formalized drinking rituals with toasts. There's 3 particular rounds, and there's symbol toasts and poetry written in that regard. And then with the other main religious ritual is the I guess bloat or blessing ceremony. And then I guess the various pieces of poetry in the book are written towards different kinds of steps you might see in such a blessing ritual, like hallowing sacred space, maybe calls to the gods. There's quite a lot of calls to the gods into the book. And then there's a few ritual dramas that's partly inspired by like the old poetry, especially in the Eddas. A number of the Eddic poems, and Terry Gunnell has some work on this. I don't recall the name of the book offhand, but about that a lot of the Eddic poems were essentially meant as ritual dramas. They would be to be performed. Some of them are like fairly simple; they can be performed with 2 people. But this is like 2 people would be reciting them, and there would be in an audience, perhaps in a chieftain's hall or something. And then other ones like Locus Senna. If you're going to do that one properly, you would need perhaps bunches of people doing the parts. Because if you have just 2 people doing the voices for Locus Senna, it would require a considerable amount of talent on the person in practice in order to keep all their different voices straight when they're reciting it. Because there's at least, I forget, it's got to be more than 10. I don't know offhand how many different characters are speaking in Locus Senna, but it would be a mess to keep track of if it's just a case of only 2 people doing the performance. So, okay, so there's various poetry in my book, Viking Poetry Human Rights, I guess, meant as things to actually to use and recite during ritual. And also and of course some additional poetry, and then there's also a section on I guess prayers to the gods. And as far as the audiobook version, I guess this is not the whole thing, but it's, I guess, a selection of it. A selection I would consider some of the better poems, including some of the story poems. Perhaps those are things maybe people could, I guess you could play and listen to them. I don't think there's, I think for what I put in the audiobook version, it's not something you could like readily cue it up and play. Like you really couldn't do it to do calls to the gods for you. Which of you just cue it up on their phone to like hallow the space. No, I don't think I didn't put that kind of diversity of poems on there. It's mainly like the story poems. I believe that's in the audiobook version.
Oh, that's
yeah, this is all aimed toward like the modern practice of the religion, as to what kind of things was used in I guess the ancient heathenry. It's uncertain, of course, as I said, with like the Eddic poems being ritual dramas. In one case, one can imagine it's easier to envision some of them perhaps being used in religious practices of some kind. But as far as I guess the exact time period, that can be a little unclear because the dating of a lot of the Eddic poetry still remains quite uncertain.
Oh, that's interesting. When I saw the audiobook, it's I think it's a different thing to hearing because we saw that poetry based on some aspects of Norse mythology and many aspects of the events of in Norse mythology, and the book is I think is a complement of on each other when you listen and have the version of reading is it's a very different book to hear. At first, I think it was a music album because it was in the band camp, but now I understand that it was a version of the book in the audio book. uh, and that's a very different thing to complement on each other, and that's to make this book. I think how can I say a diverse book about mythology and with aspects of the um, Norse religions of nowadays, and that's different to to see that.
That made me think briefly. I guess it would be an interesting idea to do a complete, in other words, a full audiobook version of it. In other words, me reading every single poem in the book. Although I don't think, yeah, my book will have to get a lot more popular for that because that will be that's a considerable time investment to make such a recording and do it properly.
Yeah.
My skills aren't that good yet.
Yeah, but it's a nice book. It's a I think I like this and this book and the other colored. Let me remember. I think you have another colored. What's the name? I think it is the Meaty. What's the name of the book?
Eagle's Mead.
Yeah, Eagle's Meat. Yeah, I think this is two of my books that I found very different and very peculiar in some points and with many things with related to the content about Norse mythology and Woods of the Runes. It's a very nice book. The sixth question is about I think a very intriguing question about related to Norse mythology. I think you can put your opinion about this topic. Odin is considered a deity related to runes, but we also have a Bragi, a god related to the Skaldic poetry. How can one complement the other in the process of understanding poetics as a ritualistic practice?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I think there's a couple different ways to spin this one here. I think I would start with in order to consider what I consider the origin of why do we have Odin and both Odin and Bragi to begin with? And this is something I dealt with a little bit in my MA thesis. That even like Odin is typically considered a god of poetry in some sense. So why do we also have Bragi as another god of poetry? And I think the answer to that starts with Odin in a lot of the mythology is generally portrayed as the chieftain of a very fine and rich hall. And so I guess in the case of where like the divine society tends to mirror human society in some ways, you have Bragi as being the court skald in service to Odin, the mighty chieftain, much as you would see like various skalds of the Viking ages around the kings there. And so I guess in part of the reason we get a separate god of poetry is that we can't have Odin being his own court skald. And nor would it really make nor can we really envision like Odin as being a court skald to some other deity. So I guess so Valhalla needs his own court skald since Odin's the lord of that hall. And so we got Bragi. And I think to mixing them both with regards to poetics as a ritualistic practice. Let's see. It touches on another question of whether this god Bragi is the same or like a deified. There's a human poet named Bragi Bodisson the Old, and it's an open question as to whether Bragi the god is the deified version of the human poet. I won't attempt to settle this question, although I do think in certain cases Snorri seems to keep them separate. In any case, but the human Bragi has a verse attributed to him. I think it's in Snorri. It's the verse where he meets a troll woman. I find that's an interesting verse for I guess modern poets can use as I guess to orient themselves around the ideal of a skaldic poet. Let's see. I think yes. So that particular verse, it's in Snorri's Haudatal. I think it's in the beginning of the section where he starts talking about Hades, or names for things. So it's a tale of Bragi running into a troll woman who challenges him in verse. And with regards to both Odin, I think I'm probably still working that out as to the way the distinctions between Odin and Bragi with regards to understanding poetics as a ritualistic practice. But I think certainly I would see the Bragi aspect of it maybe more about poetry for public performance in certain cases of way, or poetry for like various public or social uses. Whereas to the extent I view Odin with poetry, this may be poetry maybe more for like self-transformational or even private uses. But that's my own take on it. And then as far as also to what to make with Bragi, because of course one of the which one is it? It's the Sigurd Drivamal, I think it is. There's a line in there talking about places where runes are carved, and there's the one of the lines there literally says something like Bragi's tongue.
It's curious because we saw that many dates or divinities of using in the Norse mythology, you have sometimes gods that have some same aspects. Example, we have Odin as associate with war, and Thor sometimes associate with war. Same, it's a thing that's very curious to see, and we have sometimes this relates because Odin have related to the runes, but Bragi related to the poetry as same functions, and this is very curious things to see in this type of mythology. For the, how can I see? The seventh question is, for those who seek knowledge through the runes, how do they begin the practice and use of these alphabets, both with the old and the new Futhark?
Okay, well, I think that would depend on, I guess, what you want to use it for. I guess, what do you envision, I guess, in this sense? Like, what are the people using it for in the question?
People that I would like to start using the runes for practice in rituals. People nowadays that are interested in using the runes.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'll break this down into a few things. yeah, I guess a lot of people, certainly with modern heathen religious practices, it's using the runes to write things. And I think for of course, if you're going to write modern English, I think obviously I feel that my American Futharch is the best one to use to write modern English. But certainly you can attempt to use both the American Futharch and the older Futharches Futharks to write modern English. You could try the same approach. It's just that if you try to do modern English with the elder Futhark or even the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, using the original sound-based approach, you do run into some hard limitations with things. And then, but for either of them, I would say certainly, yeah, people, I would recommend both. Okay, whichever one you're using to acquaint yourself with the actual sounds the runes are supposed to make, and to view the runes properly as sounds, not as letters, to escape the trap that a lot of a lot of moderns, and especially I think this is especially people maybe as a bilingual person, you're probably a good way out of the trap itself, in recognizing different languages and different sounds. But like a lot of people who are just English speakers and never learned any other languages, I think they can fall into the trap of not understanding how bad the modern English alphabet is at representing the sounds of the English language and how chaotic the spelling system is. Whereas, like I guess with your language being bilingual, and you can probably appreciate the differences in how well spelling matches to sound. I assume you'll tell me it's atrocious in the match of spelling to sound compared to Portuguese.
Yeah,
English is compared to most. I'm not sure. Offhand, I don't know if anything of language that's more atrocious than English with regards to the spelling and sound match. But to continue, I guess, to the answer to the rest of the question, yes, I would say certainly, I guess, in education, I guess the nature of the sounds, so especially to use it for writing, because that's certainly the start for that. And I guess in other directions, and I actually find it something that's helped with, at least certainly with the modern stuff, is the American Futharch. The practice also works well with certain kinds of, for those who want to use it for like chanting or magical gallery uses. And there's there's exercises where involving pairing the sounds, say like, for instance, pairing the various vowel sounds with the consonants. I'll give an example here in a moment, but I believe this approach I got out of Edred Thorson's books. And I believe he got it from like early 20th century, I guess, German rune magician stuff. And then you even see a technique like this in like, or at least the English speakers are familiar with, like sort of nursery rhymes. Most English speakers have heard the one that goes fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the bones of an Englishman. Like there was like that alternation of sounds in like the fee, fi, fo, fum. And you can do an alternation with sounds, for instance. And that's a practice I do that certainly was helped with distinguishing and familiarizing the sounds. Like for instance, take, say, we'll go, start with the modern rune, American Futharch rune fee, and then I would pair it with the 9 vowels of the American Futharch, and like pronounce them in sequence, going something like fu, fa, fe, fi, fa, fo, fu, fa, fa. And so that's and to do a practice like that, basically demands that you become familiar with the sounds of all the 9 vowels in the American Futharch, and then you can then produce these vowels distinctively. And certainly, a sound practice like this, with whatever Futharch you're using for, will be very helpful in I guess in understanding and connecting to it, so that you can use it for writing in the proper fashion instead of just using it as like a rune code or a simple alphabet substitution cipher.
Yeah. It would be very different. I was thinking if someone created the runes for Portuguese or for other languages, it's mixed them to create a new type of futak. It was, I think, it would be very, very different to solve that. I don't know if we have here in Brazil this how can I say, this combination with our language to the futaks, but I think we don't have. But it will be very, very different thing to solve that, because our language don't have similarities with the Old Norse or Germanic languages, but we have many persons here that were related to how can I say, pagans religions of nowadays, and it will be a thing that was a combination that I think will be very, very interesting to solve.
Yes, and I think there's certainly some challenges to it in a way. In some regards, I would almost say an American Futharch is. I feel like it's probably one of the easier ones in terms of in terms of modern Germanic Futharks. I feel like probably American Futharch was probably one of the easier problems to solve in creating one. Certainly, the other Germanic languages, they have their own challenges with regards to like I could use the Anglo-Saxon Futharch as the starting point. A modern German Futhark would probably have to take the Elder Futhark as its starting point. And so there was no update of the runes partway through for the German language like there was for English. And then in many cases, the names for the American Futharch runes, quite a number of them just continue the ancient names that go back to the Elder Futhark. Like for instance, Elder Futhark Dagas became modern English word day. And similarly, Elder Futhark Yera became the modern English word year. And there's a few more like that. That becomes a problem with non-Germanic languages, is that probably none of the, in other words, a set of names to go with, say, a Portuguese Futhark, the names would almost have to be created up from scratch. So that would be that would be a tricky problem there.
No, yeah, thank you. It's a point that I was thinking about that, because when we create a language, you have some specifics changes that we have to combine in some aspects of the actual language to the sometimes old language that are combined to use. I think the American English is more cool because we have in the time of the English language, for the time of, example, Anglo-Saxon language, was have this related at some point with the using of runes, using of the tradition of Germanic language, and that's, I think, is more easy to combine these aspects with to create this type of new Futhark example. The 80 question is, in your definition, how can we classify Gauder and Seder, and how to use them correctly in specific rituals?
Okay, let's see. Yeah, what I can mainly talk about here is kind of the modern distinction I use in terms of modern practices of what are called Gauder and Seder. Let's say I'm not gonna say much about whatever was considered historical Gauder, and even less about historical Seder. I'm certainly not the person to ask about historical Seder practices. I think most are probably familiar with. There's some tantalizing scenes in Eirik the Red saga about a save Kona, and I think beyond that, So yeah, that's a whole can of worms, and there's certainly as far as ancient practices of sailor, there's people way more expert about that than I am. But as far as the modern distinction, I do follow the modern distinction. I did get this from Edward Thorson, and that Gallagher would be typically kind of like a vocal chanting magic, and which like kind of in which one remains very focused and alert. But whereas sailor would be a kind of it would be kind of a trance work of sorts, where one would sink or go into a trance of some kind to do sailor, or at least certain kinds of sailor. And that's the distinction I consider between the two of them. Like for instance, maybe there's sailor practices that don't involve that thing, and you have to get into the realm of what was historical sailor. But at least in this kind of trance work practices, maybe someone would put a cloak on or a hood over. They might be closing their eyes. So but it may vary by practitioner. Whereas, like, I guess Gallagher is something. I guess you could do Gallagher with eyes closed, but a lot of people would not see any problem with doing. Or I wouldn't see any problem with doing Gallagher with eyes open and fully alert. So yeah, that's the real dichotomy I see. But one involves trance work, the other does not. As far as using them for, I think there is a lot more to go into about sailor, but I'm not too overly familiar with either the ancient practices might have been, or what the modern reconstructed or innovated practices are on that.
Oh, and for that point, it's that's related to the next question, because how the rituals we discussed were described in Norse myths, and what's this importance in certain events in this mythology? How Gather and Satyr appear in some points of Norse mythology, and the importance of some events in Norse myths.
Let's see. Okay, I'm trying to think. I'm not sure. Let's see. Well, as far as Satyr in the Norse myths, I mean, the main one I'm aware of, as I mentioned, is the Eirik the Red's saga. As far as Gallagher in the Norse, and I guess in the ancient in the sagas, I think there may be some kind of chanting there, but I'm actually drawing a blank on whether anything in the sagas is described specifically as Gallagher at the moment. I feel like there is something. What's more coming to mind is, it's a little fuzzy at this point, is from my PhD dissertation, in which I looked at early modern, or like modern Icelandic, in other words, like 8 sources written down in the 19th century primarily about craft of skalds or magical poets. And there's certainly references to Gallagher. But I think, okay, now some of it's coming back. I mean, I think in a lot of cases, it's not entirely clear in any of these sources whether modern or pre-modern, just quite what's being referred to with Gallagher. So I think that becomes kind of tricky. Let's see. Is there a particular scene that you have in mind, or like Norse myth scene? I guess there's the moment I'm drawing a blank on some of the Old Norse sources that might talk about whether it would be Gallagher, or as I said, the sources are. I mean, they never seem to be entirely clear about what Gallagher is when they're using the word. We don't get like to go back to the Eggles saga example with the drinking horn. I don't believe we're told he used Gallagher. But I mean, we are told he just straight up uttered a poetic verse to go along with his rune carving on the horn. But I don't believe any specific technical term is used to describe it. I think
And so,
for other rituals, I think that's more goes into the next question.
yeah. So about another other ritual that we discussed, Gauder and Seder. But in your vision, what is the definition of a blood, and how this ritual starts since the Viking Age, and the difference of how it was done back then compared to new forms of paganism?
Okay, yes. There are some various saga clues with regards to the I guess bloat, which in some modern contexts they'll use the word blessing to use an English form for it. From what I understand, that's been pieced together about how this ritual may have been in during in the pagan Old Norse period. This is, I guess, sort of and a lot of its features, I guess, is kind of what you would expect for like an agricultural pastoralist society that's like raising where raising livestock is important and a typical part of one's existence. But I understand, at least I believe there's some descriptions of these blessing rituals. I don't recall what sagas they're in precisely, but that the a particular sacrificial animal, I guess, would be in some cases. I believe there might be a saga reference about a Yule boar, in which the boar is led around to the people, and they swear oaths on the boar, or some such things, and then I guess the boar is like, I guess later sacrificed and then cooked and eaten by the people gathered at the feast. So this was and so as far as religious, and so that's why I guess religious practices of those times, it would have been quite natural for them, being like a livestock raising culture. You have to kill these animals in order to eat them, and so they do make religious festivals around them, in which perhaps they're at least what the reports are. And I think some modern Alsa have adapted this to like where the some modern heathens, I believe, do actually practice a similar sort of animal sacrifice in that sense, where I guess the animal will be slaughtered, and I guess it's the blood of the animal collected in a bowl, and then at least I believe there's a saga reference somewhere that talks about the participants being sprinkled with the blood of the sacrificed animal, and then the meat of the animal is cooked, and the people eat it at a feast. But this is, of course, very rare in the modern times, because in say Old Norse society, virtually everyone would be familiar with proper techniques for raising and slaughtering livestock, whereas you have to go. It's few and far between are the modern heathens today who have the kind of experience and training to do animal slaughter and butchering properly. So a lot of modern heathen bloat is a substitute with pouring out typically a bottle of mead, or mead or beer or some other kind of alcohol is done as a substitute.
It's interesting, so that because we saw that have difference but permanence with in some different periods. In some points, we have sometimes some rituals of sacrifice of animals, example, but not all the animals of that time. Sometimes chickens or some specific animals. Because I have contact with these persons that have this type of paganism, but they have sacrifices not that of the time that in period time sometimes have a horse or dogs have other animals, but now we have that have more animals of farm animals or counts, but not all the animals are specific in some points to using for rituals.
Okay, yes. Okay, I can certainly be specific. Yeah. Yes, that reminded me of another aspect to it. In many cases, for particular animals were considered to be associated or linked with particular gods. We have boars linked with Freyr and Freya, and I think then I guess horses are linked with I believe maybe also Freyr, Odin especially. And then there's a few others here and there, but which reminded me, I don't believe there's any particular god that's associated with chickens. So.
Yeah, it's more. I think it's more from aspect from nowadays. I think the use of the chickens are related to, I think, for using a specific animal of the, how can I say, that we eat, but we use nowadays to during the process of the ritual kill this animal, but give part of the animal to the gods, and then you eat the animal too after preparing, cooking the animal after kill them. It's more nowadays, more like this in some aspects, not using more any more animals that are using in the Viking Age, but we are using more domestic animals or this type of animal like chickens to make a new form of a sacrifice for blood. I think it's a new change of perspective for the animal sacrifice. And the 12th question is, out of curiosity, what's the difference between the different forms of paganism like Azathura, Heathe, and Odinism? It's possible to say that there is main difference between them?
Okay, I think yeah, my answer here is going to be one of those, I think in internet parlance is referred to as a hot take. The answer, I don't think I think for the most part in some of that there is not a significant main difference. I think I'll get into what the differences are here in a moment. There might be more. I think there's a profusion of other categories. Let's see. Besides the three you mentioned, also true heathen and Odinism, there's a few more categories I'm not recalling. Maybe in some of them are in different countries they'll use like foreign seether. I think that's one of the Nordic countries uses that because of course that's from one of those languages. But at least as far as the three things like Alsa, true heathen, or Odinism, okay, the hot take is I would say by and large there isn't a main difference. I think this may be identitarian stuff, and this touches on, I guess, to the major fault lines in modern heathenry over, I guess, the camps that would be considered to use the names they use on them for themselves, like folkish versus inclusive heathenry. And I think a lot of proliferation of these terms here is, I guess, people trying to distinguish themselves. They don't want to be lumped in with the evil racists, and so they do make. So I think I see a lot of the fuss over the different names comes out of that. So these days, in some circles, Odinism is considered, although there's maybe minor theological differences here. Like the Odinists are considered some of I guess the folkish branch that are maybe even treated like Odin as a substitute for the Christian god, and in some ways, I don't know how accurate that is, but there's certainly a lot of, with the terminology, there's certainly a lot of running around from people looking around. They don't want to be lumped in with this group or that group, and maybe in some cases identitarian concerns over whether the group they're being lumped in is I think it's more like whether it's considered racist or non-racist or that. I think that's the main thing. Like doctrinal differences, which would actual doctrinal differences, which would be the thing that would be interesting to me. I'm not sure how many of those are. Like, you might compare it to America, and like America has a lot of different Protestant Christian denominations. But if you go to the average worshiper and say a Presbyterian church versus a Methodist church versus whatever other couple is out here, I mean, the average lay person, if you ask them what the differences between those branches are, they're not going to have any idea whatsoever. So I think we could end up getting, I suppose, we could end up getting as many different branches of heathenry as there are Protestant Christianity, which most of that, all those differences, they don't largely interest me. To the extent I use a label for what my own practices are, I will tend to use both Alcitrue or heathen, both relatively equally, and have used them for a long time. And as far as, and like, I completely don't give a crap about the latest fashions over whether about like people trying to say Alcitrue should apply to this or that, or blah, 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 and so forth, about all these groups that want to avoid being lumped in with whatever other have you. I'm one of those older farts who's been around in Alcitrue long enough that I just don't care anymore. I'm not changing the term. I'm not changing my term Alcitrue or heathen on account of the constantly shifting fashions today in the internet age, which will just shift all over the place again in another couple years anyway. But to go to a different another take on that, I would say that perhaps my own sense of like my runic quest. I use a different term for, in addition to Alcitrue, another term I use for myself is Odian. And this is a very particular technical term it's different from Odinism. Odian is a very particular term. It comes out of Edred Thorson's writings. And this refers to the attitude of considering Odin as kind of an exemplary model for self-transformation. In other words, an approach to Odin that's not centered around worshiping Odin, but in many ways following or emulating certain aspects of Odin, let's say, such as, say, the winning of the runes, or in my case, which I view also the practice of skaldic poetry and whatnot. So that approach for myself is, I would consider, in other words, an Odian approach to, as one of like emulating or following Odin's example of wisdom questing. That for me is, I would say, that's more important to me than either than the Alcitrue or heathen or Odinist things. So I suppose that might be at least partly why I'm relatively uninterested in all the latest version of what kind of identity labels for the various factions are supposed to be used.
Oh, that's interesting. I was completely forgot to have foreign satyr too. Foreign satyr is same aspect of one of them, or is having some points of difference?
Well, I mean, I think that comes out of some. I'm not sure if to what degree there might be American groups using that term, but I know that I believe there are certainly European groups in the Scandinavian countries using that term.
Oh, understand.
Over there in Europe, of course, you have a lot of them. Yeah, that's definitely another fault line there. A lot of Europeans are very not. They're on. I guess European heathenry looks upon American heathenry a little suspiciously, and so I suppose it was trying to distinguish themselves. European versus American heathenries, but yeah, but it's just the same thing on just a different level.
Okay. How can I say here is the 13th question is one of the most how can I say? Let me here see in the questions I was here. Oh, is here. 13 question is, one of the most famous stories in Norse mythology involves Odin studying the myth of poetry. And how does this event impact the understanding of poetry in the mythical world, but also as part of the beliefs of Skaldic poets and societies in the Viking Age?
Okay, I think, let's see. Okay, well, I think calling it an event in mythology is a little, that's a tricky way to describe it, because I'm not sure that it would be meaningful to like point to. You can't really point to a time before Odin stole the meat of poetry in terms of like the Viking culture. We don't know. We know that this is at least this myth seems to be in the Viking Age at some point. If you take the view that's, I think there's some scholars that take the view that possibly Snorri created this myth. That he had, I guess, built it out of various pieces. I don't know that I would agree with that. In which case, so at least, I think at least the understanding of the story, this gives poets at least, I think, I do think it does go prior to, in my view, it does go prior to the Christianization. So I don't think it's necessarily something Snorri invented. It has a couple of its aspects have some parallels to Vedic material over in India. So it's so at least some aspects of it seem to be perhaps quite old. But I guess this gives the poets a way to relate to their craft and religious terminology, because we see in the modern West, poetry has no mythology to it. It has nor anything spiritual to it. But I guess with a story like Odin, this gives a way for the poets relate to it in a religious sense and in a cultural history sense. And of course, it gives them a lot of metaphors to use in their own poetry about how poetry itself works. And I think certainly a good part of my work with the poetry is exploring this mythology and regrounding poetry in it, to at least make, I guess, in my view, a new alliterative poetry that is grounded in this kind of mythology and relating poetry to the sacred. In this aspect, it dovetails a lot of. I generally write only in the Old Norse or Old English meters, and start to go into a tangent. This my own poetic project. I call it a sort of archaeoformalism, and that at least in modern poetry, there's I guess there's a school what they call new formalism, of like after free verse kind of took over the scene in the 20th century of new formalism and poets going back to writing in meter. Again, my view of archaeoformalism is to actually go one or several better than that, not just write in the old meters again, but to bring back old understandings and metaphors and ways to relating to poetry. And in my case, the main way of relating to poetry is the mythology that we see from the Norse. In that, I guess poetry as a mead that's brewed from the blood of the slain Kvasir.
Yeah, I think I commit a little mistake in this question, because I put that the stolen of the Idromel poetry example was related to the Viking Age, but we don't have this story confirmed in the Viking Age. I think that I write wrong here, because I think the question was how this is part of the story serve to comprehend the myths in the visions of the part of Nieda of created by Snorri Sturluson. That I think that was the right question. I think I committed a little mistake here in this part of the question. You are totally right about that.
Okay, I guess yeah, I'm not going to try to go down the rabbit hole of exactly teasing out or making claims about exactly how much Snorri did invent, because that's still considered controversial. It's I guess just if you just look at the skaldic poetry sources, it is clear that the skalds did consider Odin important, and that Odin and that poetry, Odin is a god of poetry, and Odin very highly connected to poetry. So that's definitely in the original skaldic sources. That but exactly to what degree like this let's say the 10th century skalds had a story about Odin going in disguise to this guy named Baugi, going to his farm and getting his 9 slaves to slit each other's throats over a whetstone, and getting and trying to get the meat off of Suttung. Exactly what time period that story existed in, it's not entirely clear. Certainly at least that religious or spiritual importance of poetry as coming from the god and being connected to the god. That is in the metaphors that the skaldic poetry uses.
Oh, I understand now. I think I commit this little mistake, but now I understand your how can I say, your position about that story related to the Odin and the myth of poetry. And 14th question is somewhat intriguing question is Odin sacrificed himself for the runes and their knowledge. Before this event, can we say that where there was another form of language among the beginnings of Norse mythology, especially the deities, or this is only after this act that we begin to have a clear form of writing or communication in relation to myths?
Okay, that's another one of those mythological time things where I would say I would view Odin's sacrifice on the runes as one of those beginning of time myths, so that there would actually be, I view it that there would be no language prior to speak of it in mythological time prior to the event, nor that even necessarily the other gods would exist at that point. So I guess the way in terms of the timeline of the Norse mythology, I view Odin's sacrifice in the world tree as something that would necessarily occur extremely close to the beginning, perhaps not long after Ymir has been slain. So that quite likely perhaps none of the other deities may even meaningfully exist yet at that point in the mythological timeline. So I think and that whether I don't necessarily imagine I guess the Jotuns or the Thursar that are said to exist. Like there's a story about Bergelmir escaping on a raft or something. That might be a Snorri modification of things. But yeah, I would say that prior to Odin's sacrifice, there's not really necessarily language, so to speak of, but I would consider a key part of his sacrifice, as recounted in the Havamal verses, is that in the Havamal, what I see in the Havamal verses is that what Odin gets from his sacrifice, a big part of that is he takes up the runes as the mysteries of speech. And that I guess we can also see, if we like, perhaps as the runes as being like, in some sense, like the mysteries of the universe in a broad general stroke. But the Havamal poetry, the Havamal verses, in my view, make it very clear that the runes as the mysteries of speech itself are exceedingly important, and that they're of primary importance in the verses. Because when in verse it stanza 139, it ends with it says he takes up the runes and took them up screaming, and then falls back again. And then, but then the next verse, stanza 140, has nothing to do with writing. Zero, zilch. No, the next verse is entirely about poetry. It says he learns some 9 mighty songs from an unnamed maternal uncle of his. And then it says he gets a drink poured from Othrerir. So this is a poetry. This is a verse, if about anything, is about poetry. And then the one after that is the one that goes about more about poetry in my view, because it's has the famous lines, a word got a word by a word for me, and then a work got a work by a work for me. So this is more poetry, and still absolutely nothing about writing whatsoever. And then the stanza after that, at this point now we're at stanza 142. Now it's talking about staves. I think one translation would go like, runes you will find in readable staves. So then finally it starts talking about using them for writing. And it continues with a little bit more about writing, and it goes to some other tangents. But in my view, the runes, the one kind of mystery that the runes can be that can account for both poetry and staves for writing is that the runes have to be the mysteries of speech. In other words, they're the mysteries of the basic sounds of the language. Because from those two things, you can get alliterative poetry of the kind, at least of the basic kinds you get in Fornir the Slog meter. And then you also get rune staves for writing. So this is one of the supreme importances of this. And so you could even say like runes as mystery of speech, so even like runes as language. So this is very much I would say that Odin sacrificing himself for the runes and their knowledge is quite possibly likely also a sacrifice for the very existence of language in the mythological timeline itself.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
maybe just have like animal noises or gruntings. Like I believe Emir's name is one interpretation of Emir's name is it means something like roarer. So he's just roaring, perhaps incoherently. And then it's only with Odin and his sacrifice you get distinct, comprehensible language.
Okay, I comprehend now. So we can say that Odin have some aspect related to this part of the runes, but we have language that we don't know what they are in the Norse mythology, but not significant that these specific events have relation to the language are used in the Norse mythology, right? Okay, comprehend now. To conclude, do you have any suggestions regarding knowledge about runes, Norse mythology, neo-paganism, some books that you want to have to give some suggestions to the audience of the channel that you like to present?
Okay, let's see. Okay, well, first I would say yes, definitely. Yes. I would say read books, and I mean, I guess I'm one of the older people, not up with the young. I mean, maybe some of the younger generation likes to rely on YouTube videos for a guide to modern heathenry. But I'll say definitely, everyone should read some books, and definitely read some books that the YouTubers will tell you not to read. And I'm sure lots of different YouTubers will tell you which books not to read. But let's see, as far as but definitely read a lot of read a mix of books, including including books that people are telling you not to read. But as far as my own suggestions, let's see, for academic runology, I think for a good basic beginner for academic runology stuff would be the Michael Barnes book, Runes, a Handbook. That's probably that'll be a decent start for if you're looking to academic historical runology. If you're looking for modern applications of the runes for things like magic or divination, my understanding is at this point there may be something like an uncountably infinite number of such books all over the place today. Okay, I guess, and with regards to actually applying and using the runes for magic and divination purposes, I still recommend the ones that I've worked with for a long period, and those are the main ones by Edward Thorson, Futhark and Runecaster's Handbook probably being the most famous ones. But the more recent Alu should also be read as well. Let's see, as far as like Norse mythology, do you mean like academic studies of it? Or let's see, as far as I think probably most of the people on your channel are aware of like the Eddas and the Sagas as sources. I mean, offhand, as far as other books besides the Eddas and Sagas, for Norse mythology, I'm not sure offhand of like if I would recommend any particular academic literature regarding Norse mythology. There's certainly a lot out there. Then, as far as neo-paganism practices, and yes, I'm not completely caught up on the let's see, as far as like, in other words, things that might be like how-to guides with regards to performance of like how to practice heathen religion, some ways to go about that. The one that myself and my brother still use for our own particular seasonal rituals is Edward Thorson's A Book of Troth, which has been around a good long while. There's a number of other authors out there, including a lot more recent ones. Yeah, I haven't been able to keep up with all the recent things, but I know there's at least a couple other books that are probably worth at least looking at or disagreeing with or reviewing over. I think I'm not sure what it goes in the way of. I don't know what it goes in the way of like example rituals or if it has much of a ritual guide. I know Matthias Nordvig had a recent book, but I forget its name. I think there's another one by Patricia Lafile that's a number of years a little bit older than that. But I think I'm not familiar with them. I've not read either of those, but those are some of the ones I'm aware of. I'm sure there's like modern applications of runes for magic or divination. I'm sure there's perhaps now an uncountably infinite number of books about the practice of modern heathen religion. Probably they're arguing with each other in various ways. But in some cases, I think the basic practices are fairly. Yeah, there's a lot of approaches you can do, and I don't think if anyone's taking advice on this channel and on such books, yeah, don't let anyone tell you you're less of a heathen because you're using Edward Thorson's book, or less of a heathen because you're using Nordvig's book, or less of a heathen because you're using this, that, or another book. Again, some of this can get to this circles back to the question about like the different forms of what they call them. Like, is it Alsatru? Is it heathen? Is it Odinist? Is it foreign Sither? Yeah, you can get with the guidebooks on these things. You can get it's probably a rehashing of all this terminology, and like it's also True's version of like the Protestant Protestant fragmentation, where we'll have a whole gazillion different denominations.
I think it was very nice suggestions to the channel. These books. Well, I liked some of the authors that you told here, like Matthias Norvig. I think he's a great author about some specific types of related to Norse myths or traditions. Like it's very, very interesting. Your can I say, your suggestions of books for the channel. I think it was a very, very nice. So that many types of, because we have these three type of history. We have neo-paganism, Norse mythology, and there's this. It's fantastic to have these suggestions. Mr. Westcoat, thank you so. Do you have one more?
The books. Okay, I'll plug myself here, and I'll recommend, at least with regards to the poetry, I'll definitely recommend my own books, Viking Poetry for Heathen Rites, especially for people who want to use, they want to incorporate poetry into their practices. And then, whereas Eagle's Mead, this would be more, it would be more suited to people who want to incorporate poetry into, say, maybe rune magic or other occult or esoteric practices. And although it's a ways off, I think eventually there will be eventually I'll have a book on the American Futharch runes. I think that doesn't give away anything to say that a book's coming. Anyone following me would figure, of course, there's going to be a book coming, but that's still going to be a ways to go. I do hope to have some in the meantime, a number of interesting releases of like smaller poetry books and some essays coming out later this year, hopefully. And also my doctoral dissertation, I've revised that into a book, and I'm working on that with a publisher, and it's moving along, and I want to say hopefully that will be published. Also, I feel like that one, it's hard to project a timeline for academic publishing with how slow academic publishing goes, but and of course I want to say that one maybe possibly the end of the year, more likely early next year, if I had to take a guess right now.
Oh, okay. So, an exciting news that you have a new book to come.
So it's been a while since I've had new books come out, but I think that's gonna change somewhat, and I'm gonna have a couple coming out in quick succession at some point. It may take a while, but certainly I have my Skaldic Eagle and American Futharch pages. They have a mailing list that viewers can join to keep up to date with when that stuff will be coming out.
Oh, okay. Mr. Westcoat, thanks so much for being here, doing this interview. It's fantastic. We learned a lot about traditions of neo-paganism, about runes, magic beliefs in runes, and many of these knowledge. I think many people here in the channel have interest about this part because we have in Brazil a community that was became more big and big related from people that are in neo-paganism. And I think they will be very interesting to saw that interview and comprehend many aspects of your research and from what we discuss here in this interview. Thanks so much for that.
You're welcome. Okay, glad to be here.
I just stopped the recording.